The silence in a remote post of ancient Japan had a different weight, a cold promise that clung to your skin before dawn even broke. You stood there, wrapped in thin silk robes, their dampness pressing heavily against your body as the cold morning air seeped through every thread. Beneath your bare feet, the stone floor was icy and rough, each step producing a soft, grinding whisper that echoed faintly in the chill. The pale blue light of early dawn barely touched the thick canopy overhead, filtering unevenly through the crowded branches to cast muted shadows across the heavy wooden gates before you. They were massive, worn smooth by time and stories, bearing the stains of centuries, a portal not just to a physical realm, but to something darker, something waiting silently beyond your watch. The scent of burning incense mingled with the damp earthiness of moss-covered stones, filling your nostrils with a bittersweet heaviness that refused to lift even after hours of stillness. Your hands moved methodically, arranging small offerings on the weathered altar. Delicate strands of rice, a few pressed leaves, tokens meant to honor whatever spirits lingered near. Each gesture was slow and deliberate, every breath measured, your pulse steady despite the creeping chill. You grasped your blade at your side, its cold steel pressing lightly against your waist as you ran trembling fingers over its edge. The metal was polished smooth yet wary, as if holding memories of silent battles long past. Your hand moved again to the scabbard, fingers tracing the worn lacquer as the weight of responsibility settled heavier than the cold that bit at your skin. If today a dead phone battery could feel like the collapse of the modern world, imagine the stillness you endured here, deprived of all comforts. No flickering screens, no cozy warmth, only the slow, endless stretching of early morning and the monotony of your duties. Watch, arrange, clean, watch again. Over and over, a rhythmic dance with time itself. You stepped forward carefully once more. The sound of your footsteps, muted and cautious, was joined suddenly by the distant ringing of temple bells, faint and slow, weaving into the growing light. The sun finally brushed a pale caress against your cold face, promises of warmth, faint yet welcome. For a brief moment, the ancient world seemed to exhale, a delicate, faint beauty, fragile as mist on stone. Stilled mid-sway, the usual rustle of early birdsong ceased. Your eyes strained into the shadows beyond the gate, but all you saw was the dark silence waiting, patient, unreadable. A subtle shift, a presence unseen but palpably near, tightened the space around you. This solitude grew thicker, heavier, no mistake possible now. Hey, before Morpheus catches you completely, take a quick moment to check if you're still subscribed. For some, the button has vanished, and I don't want you to miss the next sleepy tales. While you're here, leave a soft like a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this little calm corner alive. Thanks for being part of it. The sudden stillness settled like a heavy cloak draped over your shoulders, thicker and colder than the morning's chill. You felt it pressing in from the shadows beyond the gates, an absence of movement, even in the smallest leaf, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Your fingers lingered briefly on the lacquered wood of your scabbard, the smoothness a faint contradiction to the tense silence that surrounded you. Each breath you drew was slow, deliberate, the air crisp and biting, carrying the faint musky scent of pine needles mixed with damp earth. The temple bells faded, leaving only the muted white light struggling through the canopy above. You shifted your weight carefully, the rough stone beneath your feet, cold against your skin through the thin silk robes. Dampness clung stubbornly to the fabric, mingling with the sweat that had begun to bead at your temples. There was a distant rustle, soft but unnerving, like a whisper brushing the edges of your awareness. You strained your eyes, trying to pierce the deepening shadows that draped the ancient wooden structures like thick cobwebs, but found only the gathering dusk, hiding secrets you could not yet name. Your hand tightened instinctively on the hilt of your blade, your fingers burning against the smooth, cool steel, even through the faint hum of your sleeve. The metal was still, unyielding, a silent partner in the rhythm of your watch. You knew the stories etched into its edge, the long nights and whispered prayers that had borne it through generations. And now it was yours to carry. Your steps moved again, careful and slow, each footfall muted by the softness of moss creeping between the stones. The sensation of the ground underfoot was uneven, the cold seeping upward, grounding you in the present moment. You paused near the altar, where your offerings still rested untouched. The delicate rice grains, almost translucent in the dim light, seemed out of place amid the wildness that encroached around the edges of the post. The pressed leaves, brittle with time, held the faint scent of lavender and wood smoke, a reminder of fleeting warmth amid enduring cold. You exhaled slowly, the breath steaming in the frigid air like a pale ghost, and for a moment you allowed yourself to simply be, the pulse of the world drawing slow and steady through your veins. Ahead, the heavy gates groaned softly in the subtle movements of the wind, a deep, resonant sound like the distant toll of morning. You took a tentative step forward, fingers trailing along the rough surface of a pillar, fingertips damp with cold dew. The texture was complex, rugged, yet worn smooth in places by endless hands long past. The weight of years pressed on your skin, and with it, the unyielding duty that had become yours. Every detail pressed upon you, the faint creak of bending timber, the subtle shifting of shadows as the sun leaned further toward the horizon. Your eyes adjusted to the near dark, catching the faint shimmer of something metallic near the base of a distant tree, a glint that held both promise and threat. You hesitated, senses sharpening as your breath caught slightly, a flicker of the familiar unease brushing at the edges of your calm. The forest seemed to close in a little tighter, the chill deepening with every heartbeat. Yet, even amid the heightening tension, there was a strange comfort in the ritual of your steps, the rhythm of breath and motion, the certainty of the watch that tethered you to this ancient place. A soft breeze wove through the branches, carrying a barely audible rustle like a secret slipping through fingers. You inhaled, the scent of dry leaves and cold stone filling your lungs, wide and slow. The air felt heavier now, charged with something unseen, the silent tinder waiting beneath the surface. Your fingers traced the seam of your robe, steadying yourself as the forest's quiet whispered louder in the vast spaces between your thoughts. The evening shadows lengthened, swallowing the edges of the world, and the first stars began to glitter faintly above the trees, cold points of light holding vigil in the darkening sky. You felt an urgent stillness, as if the night itself was listening, waiting for a moment yet to break. The damp silk clung tighter to your skin, the cold seeping deeper, but your feet remained planted, silent sentinels on the ancient stone. You returned, cautiously, to the altar once more. Your hand hovered over the offerings, shaking slightly, then steadied as you adjusted the rice grains with careful precision. The scent of incense, thin now, wove around you like a thread binding past and present. The weight of unseen eyes pressed against your senses, neither hostile nor kind, just watchful, eternal. A low murmur rose faintly beyond the thick walls, a sound like whispered echoes of a forgotten prayer carried on the wind. You turned slowly, sensing the presence moving just outside the gate, but still hidden. Your heart hammered, thudding steady in your chest like a slow drumbeat, matching the steady, deliberate rhythm of your breath. The silence seemed to reach a thin edge, a fragile balancing point between watching and action. The distant outline of a figure appeared, indistinct and wavering between branches. You could not see a face, only the shape, a shadow within the deeper darkness. Your hand closed tightly around the hilt, the cold steel grounding you. You exhaled, slow and steady, a faint pulse running through you as the forest held its breath alongside you. Then, a sudden shift, a barely perceptible movement, almost lost in the whisper of leaves, and the figure stepped forward, crossing the threshold of shadow into pale moonlight. But the form that emerged was not human. It was something older, something woven from the night itself, its eyes glinting with an unspoken knowing, the weight of centuries pressed down, your breath caught between stillness and the fragile thread of awareness. You held your ground, your senses taut, as the figure's gaze met yours. And in that moment, the night seemed to lean closer, the silence folding deeper, promising that what came next would change everything you thought you understood. The figure's eyes gleamed like coals, burning beneath a thin veil of ash, their stare piercing the veil of night, clinging to the trees and stones around you. You felt a pulse beneath your skin, a slow, steady beat that matched your breath as the unseen weight pressed in, sharp yet strangely familiar. The cool metal at your side grew heavier in your hand, grounding you, anchoring the tangle of nerves that threatened to pull you into silence. The dark shape shifted slightly, a slow sway as if caught in a current only it could sense. Your gaze traced the outline, flickering with tendrils of ancient power that seemed to coil and unwind in the faint moonlight. The stillness around you deepened, swallowing the distant calls of night birds and the rustling sighs of leaves. Even the wind held its breath. There was no hurry, only the deliberate dance of shadows and the fragile boundary between what is seen and what hides beyond. You took a slow step forward, boots brushing the worn stone as your fingers slid once more over the lacquering of your scabbard. The texture was cool beneath your touch, a gentle contrast to the prickling chill climbing along your spine. Your breath caught in the evening air as you adjusted the folds of your robe, the silk heavy with cold and damp, clinging to your skin like a second shroud. With each passing moment, the silence wrapped tighter, a fabric of suspense woven from centuries of quiet watch. Behind you, the altar remained still, the rice grains shimmering faintly in the half-light, pressed leaves releasing their faint perfume, wood smoke mingled with lavender, drifting like a slumbering dream. You felt the ritual's slow pulse beneath the tension, delicate and persistent, a reminder tethering you to the earth beneath your feet. Each heartbeat echoed your movements, slow but certain. The figure took a step forward, small but deliberate, and the forest seemed to inhale with you. The scent of pine thickened, earthy and sharp, carried on a breath that slipped through the tangled branches overhead. You paused, eyes tracing the pale luminescence, falling in patches through the canopy. The space between the two of you was measured, not by distance, but by shadowed intention and the quiet certainty of unseen watchers. Your fingers curled more tightly on the cold steel, the familiar weight a silent reassurance. The hum of the night shifted, as if the trees themselves whispered secrets along their rough bark. Somewhere, deep and distant, temple bells chimed again, their tones slow and resonant, folding gently into the thin air. For a moment, the weight in your chest eased, not by much, but enough to notice the faintest warmth finding the edges of your skin. The chill of moss underfoot, the damp silk pressing close, the sharp cadence of your own breathing weaving with the forest's quiet rhythm. These sensations spun together, wrapping around you like a fragile cloak against the creeping night. The figure's form flickered as a breeze danced through the branches, stirring the veil of shadows just beyond your sight. You tightened your grip and inhaled slowly, the cold air filling your lungs with the scent of stone and fallen leaves, rich and sour. The pulse beneath your ribs held steady, a slow drum in the quiet, steady as the steady falling of time. You stepped once again, a cautious movement that sent a whisper across the stones, your feet finding the uneven ground with practiced patience. The texture of the rough stone pressed cold and real beneath your bare skin through the thin soles of your unspoken words, hanging between you like morning mist held in frozen space. Your eyes swept the area again, catching the faint shimmer of silver near a hollow root, a delicate thread of moonlight caught in something small and yet potent. The forest felt alive beneath the surface, holding its secret song, a vibration running just beneath awareness. You felt each shifting shadow, each breath of wind, each whispered rustle, as if it were a fragile thread that might unravel the quiet balance at any moment. A slow, low murmur rose from the deep shadows beyond the gates, a breath of sound that felt less like words and more like memory slipping through time. You turned, heart steadying in sync with the slow pulse of the night, watching as the figure receded slightly, blending once more into the dark loom of the forest. You exhaled, the white of your breath blooming softly in the cold air, and your gaze drifted to the altar again, or what remained of it. The offerings sat untouched, pale and still, as if waiting for a sign that had yet to come. The incense smoke curled like a fragile thread of white against the black, a whisper of flesh and fire lingering faintly above the stone. The forest seemed to lean closer, the silence folding inward as if gathering strength to reveal what you had come to witness. Your hand tightened around the hilt one last time, muscles taut, senses sharpened to the slender edge separating watchfulness from surrender. And then, just beyond the gate, an almost imperceptible crack split the stillness. The faint glimmer of a second shape, uneven and slow-moving. It hovered there in the periphery of your vision. A shadow behind shadows, breathing with a rhythm you could almost match. For a heartbeat, the night held its breath with you. Then, a whisper of movement, thinner than the wind itself, and the shadow stepped fully into the pale wash of moonlight. But the figure was no longer shadow or spirit. It was something else, something beyond the shapes you had known so far. A silent herald of a deeper darkness, just beginning to unfold before your eyes. The night air hung thick and cold around you, each breath a steady puff of white that dissolved quickly into the darkness. The figure at the gate had receded into the shadows, leaving behind a silence more profound than any before. Your heartbeat slowed, though a restless tension remained, knotted tight beneath your ribs, like a thread poised to unravel. The faint glow of the altar flickered in unreliable pulses as the incense smoke curled upwards, fragile, ethereal, as if reluctant to let go of warmth in the growing chill. You shifted your weight, the silk of your robe whispering softly against your skin, its dampness heavier now, holding close the cold that clung like a shadow at your sides. The stone floor underfoot was uneven, jagged in places, pressing a slow, sharp discomfort through your thin slippers. Your fingers found the familiar ridge of your blade's handle beneath your robe, tracing its cool smoothness like a reminder anchored firmly in the present amidst these shifting, unseen dangers. Nearby, the forest breathed in slow, shallow rhythms, shadows folding and refolding between ancient trunks that seemed to lean toward each other in whispered conspiracy. The scent of pine deepened, damp and sharp, entwined now with the richer earthiness of fallen leaves beginning to decompose with the season's quiet decay. Somewhere far off, a solitary owl lifted a murmur into the night, its voice a trembling thread woven into the tapestry of stillness. You took a slow, deliberate step forward, the soft scrape of fabric blending with the faint crunch of moss underfoot. Each contact was a measured negotiation with the cold. You felt the bite of night dampness seep into your flesh where fabric thinned, the steady pulse of your body a rhythm against the hostile quiet. Your eyes lingered on the gate's worn wood, finger-width cracks sprawling like veins, swollen with age and stories, buried beneath layers of time and shadow. Your breath caught briefly as the wind stirred, whispering low through the branches, rustling dry leaves with a sound like a secret. Being carefully carried, the incense's faint fragrance, braided with this movement, weaving scents of smoke and lavender, the delicate mixture both grounding and unsettling. You tightened your grip slightly on the blade, the metal humming with a cool weight familiar and steady, an ally against what might gather just out of sight. Ahead, beyond the gate, the moon's pale light cast accidental silver paths through the undergrowth, illuminating subtle movements caught at the edge of perception. The figures of ancient trees reached upward, their bark rough and cracked, silhouettes etched sharp against the dim sky. A slow, distant murmur rose faintly, the sound of something old and persistent, carried on the wind like a song half remembered and fading with time. You felt the pulse quicken imperceptibly in your chest, the steady drum of breath and heartbeat tightening into a delicate tension. Every sense sharpened, as if the forest itself leaned closer, waiting. Your gaze flicked to the altar again, the offerings untouched, their translucent fragility a stark contrast to the dense encroachment of night around you. The rice grains gleamed faintly, as if caught in the thin wash of moonlight, fragile and still. You stepped nearer, the cold stone chilling your feet with exquisite slowness. Each movement a careful negotiation with the silence that pressed thickly across the space. The scent of earth and wood smoke grew heavier, sinking into your lungs, grounding you despite the chill that crawled beneath your skin. You touched the pressed leaves softly, the faint smell of lavender rising like a whisper from their brittle edges, stirring memories too faint to grasp fully. A breeze shifted suddenly, scattering a few dry twigs across the stones, with a ragged whisper like a warning. Your breath faltered for a fraction of a second, caught between the cool air and the weight gathering all around like a shroud. The figure you had seen moments ago near the gate remained absent, subsumed again by shadow. Yet the feeling of its presence lingered, a tremor in the silence that neither threatened nor comforted, simply waited. You pulled your robe tighter, the damp silk folding over itself, clinging to your body in slow, heavy waves. The cold seeped deeper, but your stance stayed firm, grounded by the rhythmic certainty of your watch. The forest's quiet seemed almost tactile, a thick, damp curtain that brushed your cheek, settled upon your shoulders, and settled in your bones. Each breath you drew became a slow, weaving thread in this tension, stretching endlessly into the night. Far above, stars began to pale beneath the advancing gray of dawn, their light distant and final. The air shifted subtly, carrying an almost imperceptible scent, not quite earth, not quite air. Something elusive, ancient, and raw. Your fingers brushed against the lacquer on your scabbard, tracing the familiar worn patterns that whispered of many long nights like this one. Suddenly, movement rippled at the edge of your sight, a flicker so slight you might have imagined it. A second shadow detached itself from the deeper dark beyond the gate, folding forward like a slow wave. The presence came undulating, silent yet unmistakable, drawn by an unspoken summons you could not deny. It hovered just beyond your peripheral vision, a living fragment of night weaving hungrily into form. Your heart tightened, breath slowing to a cautious, even beat as you faced this new weight. Settling beside the emptiness of the first visitor, the two shadows hung motionless, their silence pressing the space between them and you into a fragile thread that trembled in the cool morning air. And then, in a movement as subtle as a falling leaf, one of the figures turned its gaze toward you, eyes glinting with cold fire, reflecting the faint light of the stars retreating to the east. The silence deepened, folding in like a breath held too long promising everything was about to shift beneath the ancient stones and moss. You remained still, the silence around you swelling with unspoken secrets, while the figures waited, just beyond the threshold of night and day, of shadow and waking, where the thin veil between worlds thinned dangerously. The quiet stretched taut, every breath a slow cascade, falling into what was yet to come. The cold air wrapped around you like a thin, clammy veil. The silk of your robes pressed tighter against your skin as the night shadow lingered reluctantly on the edges of the ancient post. Your breath drew out slowly, each exhale a pale wisp fading quickly into the stillness. The two figures, barely more than shifting darkness and faint ember-lit eyes, retreated a step deeper into the muted folds of the forest, their vague presence intertwining with the dense trunks and the weighty quiet. Your feet felt the uneven stones beneath, cold to the bone as you shifted your stance, muscles coiling with measured restraint. The forest seemed to lean closer with every heartbeat, the air suddenly rich with damp resin and the faint, smoky trace of long-burnt incense spiraling down from the altar. Somewhere within the tangle of shadows, the faintest sigh of wind slipped through, a fragile thread weaving between the twisted branches overhead. It stirred a scattered leaf that fluttered like a slow heartbeat, falling softly onto the moss-covered ground, breaking the wide stillness. You reached out with a slow, deliberate motion, fingertips grazing the lacquered handle of your blade hidden beneath your robe. The metal's cold surface sang faintly beneath your touch, a whisper against the relentless darkness. The familiarity of its presence grounded you, an anchor against the unseen tension rippling silently across the air, tightening the space between Watcher and the world beyond. Nothing moved but the small that scattered through the canopy. The pressed leaves released their subtle perfume, a whispered blend of wood smoke and lavender, wrapping around you like a muffled memory. Your hand hovered above them for a moment, the pulse of the night syncing with your own, as if time itself had slowed to a measured thrum. Slowly, you withdrew your fingers. The ceremony paused, the silence deepening into a steady breath of shadows. A distant murmur brushed the undergrowth, the soft rustle of leaves pushing against one another, tentative and fragile, barely rising above the solemn stillness. Your pulse sharpened, a slow drum echoing inside your chest, steadying but alert. The figures shifted like smoke caught on a breeze, their eyes flickering between coal-like embers and liquid shadow, ancient and inscrutable. You felt their gaze, a cold weight, pressing gently but relentlessly. Yet without a hint of malice, something far older and less defined. The night sky unfolded above, sowing faint pinpricks of silver light through the branches. Stars trembled quietly, distant and solitary, as if reluctant to witness what might unfold beneath their watch. The forest held its breath alongside you, vast and eternal, the dark earth beneath your feet, breathing a slow, ragged pulse. Your robe rustled softly with your movement, the damp silk a heavy, suffocating embrace that pressed memories of countless nights like this upon your shoulders. You stepped forward, careful, the faint scrape of slippered feet against rough stone sounding unnervingly loud in the vast quiet. Each pressed leaf and mossy stone beneath you whispered ancient murmurs, a language only the night truly understood. Your fingers brushed again over the cool metal, tracing the familiar rhythm of the lacquer, worn smooth by the hands of ancestors long past. The weight of duty folded over you, a cloak spun from time itself, slow, heavy, immutable. Then a flicker caught your eye, a subtle shimmer where the moonlight fractured through broken bark. Something veiled and radiant, delicate and dangerous. You hesitated, the crunch of your breath caught between the ribs of the night, the tension folding tighter like a taut string ready to snap. The distant temple bells tolled again, slow and burning with a fade that felt like both farewell and summons. Your gaze drifted back to the altar, where the offerings glistened faintly with stubborn life amid the descending dark. The incense smoke twined around your fingers, a silk thread linking the moment to a time forgotten, its fragile curl bending toward oblivion. The shadows behind the gate rippled, and you caught the barest movement, a ripple against the still fabric of the forest. Then, as if drawn by a subtle pulse you could not name, another figure stepped quietly forward from the depths. It emerged not as flesh or spirit, but as something else. A silhouette carved from midnight mist, its eyes twin stars cold with deep knowing. The air thickened, and every breath you took was a thread woven into the fragile tapestry of unseen portent. You held your ground, the cold blade steady in your hand, your senses a careful chorus of focus and restraint. The two presences, the ancient watcher and its shadowed counterpart, stood at the threshold, their silence dragging the night taut. The forest closed in with a soft inhalation, waiting for the moment when all would shift. And then you saw it, a subtle, impossible glimmer beneath the ancient gate's great archway, a faint crack of light, bending in slow arcs, as if the world itself was pulling at the edges of the veil, coaxing open the door to a deeper darkness yet to be revealed. The faint crack beneath the ancient gate seemed to pulse subtly, a soft breach in the fabric of shadow that held the forest at bay. You felt it as a vibration beneath your feet, a slight shifting of the cool earth that sent a stirring through the silence. Your breath hung steady, a measured cadence matching the slow, deliberate steps you took forward, each one pressing into the uneven stone like a careful negotiation with time itself. The damp silk of your robes whispered softly with your movement, clinging heavier with every breath of cold air, like time and moisture weaving together to suffuse the night around you. The shadows beyond the gate murmured secrets you could almost catch, words slipping just out of reach, like the lingering scent of incense curling toward fading embers. Your fingers tightened gently around the hilt, the cold metal grounding you as the chill deepened, seeping through fabrics and bones alike. Above, the canopy clung closely, apertures of pale moonlight framing the dark shapes of gnarled branches like ancient stone carvings frozen in a whispered invocation. Your gaze swept the small clearing through the gate's threshold, and the darkness seemed to gather, slow and deliberate. The night itself folded inward, bearing witness to subtle movements, shapes untethered from the known, undulating softly like the mist settling over a forgotten grave. A cool breeze stirred, carrying with it the faint metallic tang of unspoken, weaving between folds of shadow and the palpable hush of waiting. You felt the pulse beneath your skin quicken, the slow beat of your heart, a whispered drum woven into the fabric of the forest's breath. The delicate balance of stillness and expectation pressed against you like a thread poised to snap. Your slippers shifted minutely on the jagged stone, each contact a dull ache that tethered you to this place, to this night, stretching endlessly between past and present. Near the altar, the offerings glistened fragile and clear, grains of rice translucent in the faint light, pressed leaves exhaling the subtle warmth of lavender and the lingering smoke of burnt wood. You reached out slowly, fingertips trembling, before settling gently upon the brittle edges. The scent rose quietly, a fragile bridge between distant memories and this moment frozen in quiet tether. A soft stirring moved through the branches, a subtle rustle of dry leaves skimming the stone. You inhaled deeply, the mingled aromas, earth dampened by dew, the sharp resin of pine, and the fading incense, filling your lungs with cold fire. The forest seemed to lean in along with you, expectant, as your senses stretched taut, like the thin silk over your skin. Time stretched and curved around the breath you held, a long, shared exhalation suspended in the deepening dark. Ahead, the silhouette of the first shadow flickered again, wavering like a reflection caught in disturbed water. Beside it, another shape rippled forth, slower, heavier, an echo woven from midnight fog and old secrets. Their eyes, burning with embers, softened by timeless ash, met yours briefly, ancient, unblinking, patient. You stepped forward once more, the scrape of worn slippers. Against stone, a muted song, melding with the low chant of distant temple bells, their repetition, a slow cadence, mirroring the drum of your pulse. The cold seeped further, a creeping clutch tightening across your limbs, but you stood firm, rooted by the weight of obligation and a ritual older than memory. The night air shifted sharply, a whisper riding the breeze that sang against the backs of your ears, stirring a silver thread of movement beneath the gate's threshold. You hesitated as that thread unfurled, a sliver of pale light, bending delicately, revealing the barest glimpse of an opening where none should be. The veil between worlds thinned perilously, as if time and shadow were being peeled softly apart by some unseen hand. The presence beside the shadow stepped forward carefully, the faint radiance tracing the outline of a form, both ephemeral and solid, like moonlight caught in smoke. Its gaze held a depth that seemed to pierce beyond the night's skin, setting a quiet fire smoldering beneath your calm. You felt the cold steel in your hand pulse faintly, a silent heartbeat shared between you and the blade, as if understanding your unease. Around you, leaves trembled in muted rhythm, the ancient trees whispering their continued vigil. The incense smoke drifted still, tendrils curling upward in slow spirals, fragile threads weaving the air into a cocoon of memory and expectation. Your breath fell steady and slow, the night's coolness mingling with the distant warmth of a fading star. Suddenly, from beyond the gate, came a subtle shift, a pulse, a calling, a beckoning. Shapes stirred deeper in the shadows, movements that blurred and swayed, catching the edges of your vision like flickers of distant lightning beneath storm clouds. The air grew thicker, heavier, with a weight that pressed low and steady against your chest, drawing your awareness taut as a finely spun thread. You stepped back slightly, the stone cold beneath your feet, grounding you, as the two figures, the watcher and its shadowed counterpart, held their silent vigil at the edge of the ancient threshold. Their eyes glowed with a knowing that seemed to seep into the earth itself, the forest's deep quiet vibrating around you like an unspoken challenge. The slow toll of the distant bells ended, the final note fading into the night with the hollow echo of a heartbeat released. The silence that followed was profound, a poised stillness filled with the breath of a world waiting to tilt, a moment balanced delicately between what had been and what must come. And then, just as your pulse began to steady, a faint, shimmering thread of light fractured the darkness once more, fully revealing a small, ornate key catching the moon's pale glow beneath the gate's arch. It lay there, waiting, vulnerable yet impossible to ignore. And you knew, with a certainty that stole the warmth from your breath, that the key was meant for you. The key lay there beneath the ancient gate's archway, its delicate form catching pale moonlight that trembled softly on the damp stone. You inhaled slowly, the cold air filling your lungs with a shiver that traced down your spine. Your fingers brushed against the lacquer of your scabbard, fingers trembling in quiet hesitation. The night seemed to hold its breath alongside you, the forest silence stretching taut as the faint pulse of your heartbeat echoed steadily in your ears. With cautious care, you knelt to lift the small key, its metal chill whispering through your fingertips like a secret, pressing barely enough to wake the skin. The weight was light, fragile even, but it lingered heavy in your palm, as if holding the essence of countless stories folded into the night. The incense smoke, twisting around you, caught a faint glint at the edges, weaving through the stillness like a slow, fading breath. Rising slowly, your gaze fell again to the great gates, behind which shadows thickened like sloned ink spilled over time-worn wood. Your feet shifted unevenly on the rough stones, cold seeping through the thin soles of your slippers, pressing a sharp reminder that the night was no gentle cloak. The damp silk of your robes clung heavier now, cool and persistent, folding your form into the silence. Beyond the gate, movements stirred once more, a hesitant weaving of shadow and light, dissolving into shapes both familiar and strange. The first figure, the ancient watcher, whose eyes burned like smoldering coals, shifted slowly, the small flames within them flickering as if caught in a breathless dance. The second presence, more elusive yet no less real, hovered beside its companion, a silhouette woven from midnight mist, its gaze piercing the very fabric of the gathering dark. Your hand tightened around the cold steel, the familiar anchor steadying the tension, tightening like a thread poised to snap. Each breath fell slow, falling into the quiet weave of the forest's ancient pulse. Leaves trembled gently as a breeze stirred, threading the air with scents of pine resin, dry earth, and the final tendrils of burning incense. You felt the night settle heavier now, wrapped in anticipation and the quiet weight of unseen watchers. Steps pulled you nearer to the gate's threshold. Your slippers slid over stone cold and uneven, the texture biting sharply against skin too thin to resist. The delicate thread of moonlight offered scant guidance, soft against your path, as you crossed slowly into the space where shadow and substance blended. Every sound was drawn out, a leaf settling on moss, the faint rasp of silk shifting against stone. Time stretched, elongated into a river of moments, moving without haste or urgency. The key burned faintly against your palm, warmth mingled with the cold, a paradox that grounded you even as the veil between worlds thinned. You reached toward the gate, fingertips barely skimming its rough surface, tracing ancient grains worn, smooth by centuries of silence. The small key slipped from your grasp, catching briefly on a jagged splinter before you grasped it firmly again. A breath exhaled from deep within the earth seemed to rise, carrying a sound like distant temple bells, slow, solemn, fading lightly into the night. Your eyes lifted to the narrow crack beneath the gate's arch, where that impossible thread of light pulsed again, cautious and beckoning. The forest's breath was a slow exhale surrounding you, wrapping cold and dark moss like a shroud around your ankles. Behind you, the altar loomed faint and still, grains of rice glistening with fragile stubbornness in the half-light, pressed leaves exuding whispers of lavender and smoke. A faint scent braided with the chill as you turned your gaze back to the gate, sensing the watchful presence of those two figures, silent sentinels poised between the known and the hidden. Your steps faltered as subtle movements flickered along the periphery, shadows dancing with salt-white moonlight, the shapes bending and shifting like slow breaths beneath the branches. The watcher's coal-like eyes held yours briefly, a deep, unblinking calm that seemed to weigh your soul, drawing meaning from the murmur of silence. The shape beside it ebbed and flowed, like mist falling quietly onto still waters, its gaze a shiver that traced your nerves. The cold steel in your hand pulsed faintly, a steady heartbeat bound to your own as you stood on the brink where silence itself seemed ready to break. The night thickened, the weight of waiting heavy like a stone settled deep beneath the forest floor, but beneath that pressure, a flicker of something unspoken stirred, a delicate pulse of possibility almost drowned by shadows. You felt the soft curl of wind, like a whispered caution slipping through the branches overhead. The atmosphere shrank, loss of breath folding tighter around your shoulders, yet within it, a slender thread of expectation held firm, as if the forest itself paused, balanced on the edge of a secret, just beginning its slow, inexorable unfolding. The glimmer beneath the gate grew brighter, a narrow fracture widening gradually. The faintest hint that the ancient barrier might yield, just enough to allow a thin shaft of light to spill quietly into the gathering darkness. Your breath caught, held steady in the stillness as you watched, heart pacing the silent hymn of the night. And then, in that breath held between worlds, the light shifted once more, revealing not just a key, but the faint outline of a passage wide enough to step through, an opening beckoning, carved from shadow and stone, waiting patiently for the next step into the unknown. The key rested heavily in your palm, cold and unyielding, as though it carried the echo of every whispered secret folded into the night that stretched infinitely around you. Your fingers curled slowly, tightening their hold just enough to remind you that this small, fragile thing was the sole thread tethering you to the mystery that lingered beyond the gate. The ancient wood loomed behind you, silent and watchful, ink black against the faint glimmer of first dawn light that strained eagerly through the treetops. You stood motionless for a long moment, the weight of centuries pressing precisely in that suspended breath between one heartbeat and the next. The incense smoke twisted slowly upward in thin, ghostly ribbons, carrying with it the delicate fragrance of lavender and fading pine, a soft ache beneath the cold that pressed like a second skin. The damp silk of your robes clung tighter now, heavy with the chill that seeped through stone and leaf, tracing slow fingers along your exposed skin. Every subtle sensation sharpened in the stillness, every tiny sound magnified in the vast quiet. A slow, deliberate inhalation drew the forest's cold air deep into your lungs, drawing life from the thickness of moss and the dry rustle of brittle leaves skittering softly across the stones at your feet. The gate before you awaited, its surface cracked and splintered with age, whispering forgotten stories in textures your fingertips barely dared trace. The key felt unreal, a subtle pulse of possibility amid the unending vigil you had kept. Here, but now it beckoned, quietly, inexorably. Beneath the great archway, shadows gathered low, nearly imperceptible ripples against the tender light that spilled through the dense canopy. The first watcher figure, eyes like faint embers glowing through the growing dawn, remained still, its quiet gaze a steady weight pressing in your direction. Beside it, the second presence shifted, a scintillating swirl of mist that neither fully revealed nor fully concealed, as if the night itself had woven its very breath into that shape. Your feet moved with painstaking care, slippers sliding over cold stone, uneven and jagged beneath delicate toes, each step measured, deliberate, and slow. The soft scrape mingled with the murmur of distant temple bells, their slow chimes folding through the chilled air like a lullaby half-remembered. Time stretched thin, threads unraveling around you as the forest leaned in, expectant. And, unblinking, your hand lifted the key once again, fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the ceaseless tension that had settled under your skin these long hours. The cold steel of your blade hummed softly against your side, a silent companion to the unfolding ritual. The night's deep breath wrapped around you like fog, slow and dense, pressing soft and absolute against the delicate warmth of your pulse. A faint creak rippled through the gate's iron fittings beneath your fingertips as you lifted the key toward the ancient lock, the metal groaning subtly like a long-forgotten sigh that stirred the shadows at your feet. The cold pondered beneath your skin, deepened with every fraction of movement as the delicate teeth met the worn tumblers hidden behind centuries of layered wood. For a fragile instant, everything hung suspended. The fragile dance of time, silence, and the whispered breath of the forest. A shiver coursed down your spine as the lock yielded with a soft, slow click that seemed both impossibly light and impossibly profound. The gate shuddered slightly, the heavy wood shifting in reluctant response to the key's gentle command. The shaft of pale dawn light through the widening crack at the base seemed to pulse, growing, not a flood, but a sigh of illumination, barely daring to step into the waiting darkness beyond. Your breath slowed, exhaling in measured waves that fogged the cool air before you. The offerings on the altar, grains of rice translucent in the subdued light, brittle leaves steeped in the faint incense haze, seemed to shimmer for a heartbeat, fragile as the moment itself. The scent of wood smoke and lavender, wrapped like a tether, warming and binding you to this bittersweet vigil. Outside the gate, the two figures, guardian and shadow, remained motionless but watchful. Their unblinking gaze carried on a breath suspended between worlds. The faint hum of the forest seeped through the threshold. Distant calls of an owl, the sigh of wind weaving through pine, and the slow cadence of your own pulse, threading soft and slow through cold stone and silk-wrapped limbs. You pushed gently, barely enough to stir the slow parting of centuries-old wood. The secret passage revealed itself hesitantly, a narrow sliver of space lined with blackened stone, wrapped in creeping ivy and steeped in shadows thick enough to swallow light whole. The air smelled richer here, ripe with earth and untamed rain, deep and brooding, as if the ground beneath carried folds of sleeping memory. Your toes curled cautiously against the threshold, feeling the slow crawl of cold seep through, inch by inch, drawing the outer world inward with quiet persistence. The damp silk tightened around your chest as the faint gleam of the key still rested heavy in your palm, ready, waiting. As you stepped forward, crossing the fragile boundary where shadow shades into substance, your fingers brushed once more against the cold handle of your blade. The metal felt grounded and sure. Yet even its reassuring weight couldn't temper the fragile thread of unease weaving through the thinned air. Beneath the deep quiet of the forest, the ancient pulse of time trembled delicately, unspooling mysteries that had lingered just out of reach. Then, as your foot pressed within the dark corridor, you sensed it, a breath, a presence brushing close, neither seen nor heard, but woven tightly into the fabric of what was just beginning. The faint shimmer of moonlight danced along slick stones ahead, flickering like a promise born from forgotten depths. Your breath caught as the gate swung wider, revealing the hollow mouth of a long-forgotten path, a threshold carved not just in wood and stone, but in silence, shadow, and the slow unfolding of a story yet to be told. The key pulsed faintly, a quiet heartbeat in your palm, and the chill deepened, folding around you like an ancient shroud. And somewhere, beyond the veil of night, touching the edge of dawn, the watchful eyes glinted still, waiting for the next movement to break the fragile balance held for generations. The gate yielded with a slow creak, the ancient wood parting just enough to invite the pale dawn light to stretch its fingers inward. The narrow passage beyond, whispered promises of secrets long held, cloaked in shadow and the faint scent of rain-soaked earth. You stood still a moment, the cold metal of the key resting quietly in your palm, its weight a tether to all you had endured through the long night's vigil. Your breath slowed, steadying as you crossed the threshold. The damp silk clung heavy to your skin, but now the chill carried a softer touch, as if the air itself exhaled with relief. The rough stone beneath your feet felt steady, grounding in its rough certainty, and the faint rustle of leaves outside the gate settled into a gentle breath of the forest waking. For the first time, the oppressive silence loosened, revealing a subtle symphony of quiet life returning. Birdsong trembling through the branches, the whisper of wind threading through needles of pine. The two figures lingered at the gate's edge, their shadowed forms blending no longer into menace, but becoming part of the landscape they had always guarded. Their eyes, smoldering embers and shifting mist, flickered as if acknowledging your passage. Their solemn vigil silently passed to you. In the slow unfolding light, their presence receded. No longer a barrier, but companions in a story now turning a page. You stepped deeper into the narrow corridor, the stones, cool and worn beneath your slippers, each footfall a measured echo of the journey completed. The air grew softer here, less dense, carrying the faint sweetness of moss and damp wood that spoke of renewal beneath decay. The delicate scent of lavender and smoke, lingering from your offerings, wove through the space like a whispered benediction. Ahead, the corridor stretched onward, but for the moment you paused, feeling the pulse of the old world mingle with your own heartbeat. The memories etched into the folds of your robe and the cold gleam of your blade settled into quiet alignment. The burdens you had carried, the long hours spent in patient watchfulness, wove into a tapestry made whole by this singular opening. You glanced back once toward the altar, where the grains of rice shimmered faintly in the soft light, brittle leaves pressed with the care of seasons past. The incense smoke twirled upward in thin, lazy spirals, a gentle reminder that even in endings there was a trace of beginning, a delicate thread of warmth holding steady against the cool breath of history. The key pulsed softly, a silent heartbeat shared between past and present, a beacon in the stillness. You grasped it anew and let your fingers close around the hilt of your sword, the familiar weight steady, a calm anchor. The forest beyond stretched wide and welcoming, no longer a wilderness of threats, but a realm at peace with the turning of its own shadow. Sun's gentle gaze and a profound calm settled over the land. It was a silence no longer heavy, but a quiet peace, an embrace wide and still, inviting sleep or waking, dream or memory. You let your shoulders relax, the cold retreating as warmth grew gentle beneath your skin. The long night's watch had ended, a promise fulfilled in the patient unfolding of time. The stories whispered into the wood, sung by the forest and stone, folded softly around you like a protective cloak. And in that fragile moment, the boundary between worlds felt less a barrier and more a threshold to be crossed with reverence and ease. The key in your palm, the blade at your side, the lingering scent of incense and earth, they all spoke of endings natural and tender, of cycles turning slow and sure, inviting rest. You released a breath, quiet and full, and closed your eyes against the dawn's gentle light. The cold silk of your robes warmed slowly as the world held a steady rhythm, the pulse of history and hope intertwined, as if the night itself were finally ready to let go. The final hush in the forest wrapped around you like a soft lullaby, a quiet benediction steadying the heart and mind. And as the sun's first true rays spilled warm across the heavy gates behind you, a slow peace settled deep, an unbroken silence that promised the gentle unfolding of all tomorrows. With the key's weight fading to a faint hum beneath your fingers, you stepped forward into the unfolding light, ready at last to rest, to dream, and to become part of the stories whispered by stone and shadow forever after.